Why, hello there, and welcome to another ramble. I'm Corny Swiss,
And I'm Corny Phil.
and today we're going to be discussing English first, statistics. And I guess as a brief introduction to this topic, a lot of games, in particular wargaming products, or at least the ones that we deal with, are very statistics driven by the player base. So your win rate, your average experience per game, things like that. That's all very scrutinized, let's say. And in World of Tanks, it was especially a thing because you find when people have that information, they use it to kind of maybe discount opinions or kind of rage at people who don't have, a great win rate or don't have good statistics or whatever. Regardless of kind of what's relevant. So I guess what we're going to discuss is statistics place in games such as War Thunder, such as World of Tanks, such as World of Warships, and kind of what they mean, what they don't mean, and why, and whether or not they ultimately matter. So, Phil, would you like me to start?
Um, I'll start this time.
Okay, go ahead.
So I think we can safely say that everyone has been in a game at least once where somebody's pulling up on a second monitor the statistics of the enemy team or even of their own team, and looking to mock, criticize, mock, or say, or even the opposite, say, oh, we're screwed. The other team has a Unicum player, has a 70% win rate. Like, people get so wrapped up in looking at these numbers that honestly, a lot of times they don't play well. And I think that that's the mistake a lot of people make. I remember recently in a World of Warships game, two guys just started screaming at each other in chat because one guy had a bad win rate. I mean, granted, the guy's win rate was like in the high 20s, low 30s, I think. So it's just pretty bad, but it's still, who cares? He's a ship, he's got guns, we need to use them. So, I just think that the statistics get overused a lot. Do you agree with that?
Yeah. So I guess we'll start off with the World of Warships example. For example, I think World of Warships and World of Tanks are very statistics driven, just because those statistics are readily available. Primarily because of things like you have health bars and you do damage. So you have other new statistics now: average damage per game, average damage taken, average damage blocked. All these statistics that you can start looking at. And the interesting thing is that with War Thunder, those statistics generally no one really cares about, or I don't care about them at all. Like, regardless, no matter what the game. But in War Thunder, people generally don't care about statistics. And I think that might be part of it to do that just the way the game is constructed, there isn't a whole lot of opportunity for people to rely on statistics. I think we've probably talked about it before, or maybe I have. In War Thunder, the chance of you having a game where you spawn in and immediately die for some unknown reason, never get to shoot at an enemy tank, or even you do but you don't kill anybody, is actually fairly high. That happens a fair amount, especially if you're not like this super god tier player, or if you can, well, it happens to everybody basically. In World of Tanks and World of Warships, that's not really the case, because it's very rare for you to be one shot off the bat. It happens. It can happen. Happens probably more in World of Warships than it does in World of Tanks. But ultimately, people use things like win rate, like individual statistics, or even just a combination of statistics to kind of judge a player prior to them actually doing anything, or even in the course of doing things. You talked about like XVM, for example, tells you have a 10% chance to win the battle. That doesn't mean you can't win. It actually doesn't say anything about what's going to happen in the battle. All it says is that based on past performance, there you have about a 10% chance to win, assuming everything that's happened in the past stays current to the present. And I guess that's kind of my philosophy about statistics is statistics are always based in the past. You can't have statistics that accurately represent the present or the future because once something happens, it gets immediately moved to the past, and then those get lumped into the statistics. You can't have statistics from the future because it hasn't happened yet. That's not possible.
And if you can, we need to have a talk.
Yeah, we need to
reach
talk.
out to us.
But so you have basically a aggregate of past performance, which granted is the people can you can in a world where we want to get the quick and dirty method to just get an answer, people will look to statistics and things like that because it's just you look at it once, you get the data, it's an aggregate for what happened in the past, and then you make an assumption that it'll continue to happen in the future, which is kind of the core problem I have with statistics is that they're useful, but they don't tell the story almost at all. You can always have the situation where the Rotten Tomato World of Tanks player absolutely humiliates a Unicum. Now, it doesn't always happen, and according to statistics, it doesn't happen that often. But it can happen, and it does happen. Has it happened in the past? Yes. Can it happen again? Yes. And that's ultimately what matters. Because when you're trying to win a game or you're trying to win one of those tougher games according to statistics, you need, honestly, to win, you just have to have the people who traditionally don't play that well just have a good game. And everyone's perfectly capable of having a good game. So it becomes a situation where RNG can play a factor. Maybe the RNG is good on your team. That's something that statistics try and take into account by having tons and tons of sample size, like playing 10,000 games to kind of eliminate RNG from the picture. But RNG is still a real thing.
Well, yeah, but it's not even RNG. It's I remember plenty of games that said, oh, we have a 10% chance to win. We may as well just leave.
Yeah.
Like, no, I mean, 10% still means 10%.
It still means you can win.
We don't know if we're, I'll say, and, even part of that, it's like, yeah, it says we have a 10% chance to win, but we start with the same number of tanks they do. So, all it takes is a couple of hits. Or even, I remember a couple of games where their best Unicum players were in World of Tanks, where, like, their best players were not in tanks that could influence the game. Maybe they were lower tier. Maybe they were in scout tanks, or maybe
can
one
influence
of them was
the
an
game.
artillery
But
player.
your point stands that they're not the mediums or the heavy tanks of the world that are the real kind of workhorses.
Yeah, yeah. Well, my point being that yes, they can influence the game, and they probably will because they're good, but it's possible to take them out relatively quickly, and suddenly your team's odds go up so much because this one guy's not dragging his team's win rate up. So, ultimately this statistics-oriented approach, like, I get it because I like statistics too. I like numbers and I like them making sense. But you can't just look at win rate. I would say win rate's probably one of the worst statistics to look at as just its core because I don't think it really tells you anything about the player. As an example, like for me, it was a frustration point for me for a long time, and I eventually just got over it. But my win rate tended to be a little lower because I played a lot of artillery. Or in World of Warships, I play a lot of carriers. And I'm not playing the Japanese carriers, which are the, objectively the more influential in the game on average. So, like, my win rate's taking hits because there's some number of games where I just lose. I can't do anything about it. Or my influence is so small that I can't do anything. So in those kind of situations, my win rate is being artificially held down. And the flip side of that, there are people who specifically play a single plane or a single tank or a single ship is extremely strong. So you have people whose win rates are artificially inflated because they only play what's OP. and then you catch them and they're not playing something that's OP, and suddenly they're not playing like their numbers would indicate.
Well,
So
it's like
really,
people who have like 10,000 games on the T18 Tank Destroyer, that little rank 2 thing in World of Tanks.
yeah.
Yeah,
So what
it's
does that do?
10,000. It's yeah, I mean it's 10,000 games in this rank 2, sure, and you achieved a 70% win rate while you're doing it, but you're also playing a tank that can't be easily penetrated by almost anything at its tier, and one shots everything at its tier. So
Yeah, it's actually a really good example.
what's the so what's the relevance to those 10,000 games? I mean, it
Yeah,
shows that you can take a tool. It's like they give you a hammer that you don't have to aim, right? You just literally have to swing your arm, and the nail will get driven all the way down every time, 100% of the time, or in this, let's say 70% of the time. So, you just have to swing your arm. It's not like, the guy who, lines it up, those guys who can, like, line up the nail and then, without holding the nail, just, whack it once and drive it all the way down. I mean, that takes some skill. Like,
yeah,
that takes some real skill
exactly.
to do.
And
And
yeah, I mean, so ultimately, like that kind of data matters. I actually wanted to ask you, did you have another point about this, or do you have
you can ask me what I probably forgot.
okay, well, welcome to rambling. Um, so so win rate we kind of agree probably isn't the best indicator because it's too easy to manipulate in both directions, or not manipulate necessarily, but manipulate upwards or have press downwards for faults that are unrelated to skill level. What do you think about like damage caused per game on average
So,
as an alternative?
so when you think about, I guess we're going to talk specifically about World of Warships and World of Tanks here, because
Yeah, because
obviously,
yeah,
well, because obviously War Thunder doesn't have like a damage
yeah.
thing. Yeah, I
Well,
mean, I
but
guess you could count hits, kind of.
yeah. Well,
Usually, if you
accuracy
hit,
is irrelevant. Well, if you want to explore accuracy first, that makes sense too.
no,
I,
no.
I
Well,
do
we'll talk
realize that.
damage because accuracy. I think accuracy in itself is flawed because okay, you're hitting the target every time, but you're not penetrating. You're not doing anything useful.
Yeah,
You're firing HE from a 76 millimeter gun into a heavy tank. It's not going to do anything. It might break his gun. But you hit him every single time, so your accuracy is 100%.
yeah,
Well, that doesn't mean anything. That's not helping the team win. So I think for War Thunder, it doesn't really have a statistic like this. It's but in World of Tanks and World of Warships, it's damage caused, average damage caused per game. And
yeah,
of them, it's probably one of the better ones, but it's still not indicative. And I'll explain why I think it's better. You think about the goal. Most games end in one team destroying the other, just killing everybody. And
yeah,
you lose some ships along the way. So if you think about each team as a combined health pool, let's say each team starts the game with plus or minus some, within margin 100,000 health each. And it might be like 999,050 or whatever, and the other team might have slightly
yeah.
more. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at
Yeah,
the end
feel
of the
free
day.
to simplify the math so you don't have to think too hard.
Yeah.
10 players each with 10,000 health.
Yeah,
There you go.
so let's say 100,000. The player's number doesn't matter. 100,000
Well,
health.
it makes the math simpler. Just
But
trust
I'm
me.
not going to do any math. So 100,000 HP per team. So what you want to do is have the amount of damage that each player does add up to that 100,000. And you want to achieve that adding up, that 100,000 damage before the other team. So if you have a team full of people who cause lots of damage on average, and versus a team who doesn't cause as much damage as quickly on average, then on average, the first team that does lots and lots of damage will win because they just do more damage. And as you do damage, you destroy ships and tanks, and slowly you kind of whittle down the enemy's damage potential, which I will add is always 100,000 in this case. One player can account for 100,000 damage, in this situation. It doesn't matter how many players there
Extraordinarily rare,
are.
but yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. In a World Tanks game, you could be the guy who does every point of damage for your team. It's not going to happen. Well, it won't happen. It could happen, but it won't. Or you could be the guy in World of Warships who literally hits every ship. They all line up in front of you. You hit them all. You kill them all. and the rest of your team are cheerleaders in the back, for whatever reason. So that point being
Again, not going
aside,
to happen, but it's a fun
yeah,
idea.
that point of that being taken into consideration, if you look at it that way, where the ultimate goal is to achieve a certain damage potential in a game, then ultimately the only statistic that matters is how much damage are you likely to put out. But that also comes under the pretense that there's games where you just play really well for just some random reason, and you citadel like 6 ships, or you set off or you burn like 6 tanks, and you blow up a few ammo racks, and you cause
Exactly.
insane amounts of damage. Like you did like 10,000 damage, but on average you only do 1,000.
Yeah,
You know,
ultimately that's the truth with all these statistics, is that they can lead to a general understanding, and the way I would have approached it, saying, well, if you have 10 players on each team, each with 10,000 health, and one team has a team average of 12, if each player averages out to 12,000 damage a game, that team's probably going to win, because on average they're doing more than 100,000 damage, and the other team may or may not be. But that being said, we kind of keep coming back to, is that only tells part of the story, and it only tells you the past.
it will never tell you the present or the future.
Yeah, and even then, so he averages 10,000 a game. Okay, well, what does that actually mean? Does that mean he has does that mean that most of his games are centered around 10,000, or does he have does he play a very feast or famine? It's like in baseball, you have and I'm gonna muss up the terms here, but so you can go with me. But you can have a guy who he either hits a home run or he strikes out. There's not a lot of in between. So he may he may get a lot of runs scored. He might have a lot of RBIs, but he also's got a lot of
His
strikeouts.
hit percentage, his batting average will be low. His on base percentage will probably be low. But
on the other hand, when you need him,
go ahead.
But his slugging percentage?
I don't know how slugging. Well, it'd be his it would just be his RBI count, and his run. It would basically be his RBI count would be really high. His number of home runs would probably be pretty high, but to basically your point, it's a good point that you have people who you can definitely have people who do 10,000 damage every time they enter a game, or in that ballpark, and you have people who get 0 or they get like 20,000, and it just averages down.
Types.
Yeah, and so but the point still stands that even though, I mean, I guess I gotta, before I say this, even though, actually, to preface this thought, I still think that even the damage caused statistic isn't good enough. It isn't, and it honestly isn't useful, because the chance of it being wrong is actually enough where I don't care for it, if that makes any sense. I know I'm using kind of statistics to explain why I don't like statistics, but it doesn't really, it'll never tell the story game in, game out. So it's not reliable information, basically. But to the point there, I said that I like the damage caused statistic better than like win rate or even average XP, because that can be inflated by the tiers you play. If you only play really super high tier vehicles, you're going to earn more XP, because that's kind of how it works. If you only play like whatever. So a counterexample, if you only play light tanks in World of Tanks, you generally don't get as much XP, because spotting damage isn't counted as your damage. I think if I remember right, it's counted as 50% your damage. It's like you assisted that damage, so you don't get all the XP for it or all the credits, but you get credited like an assist with it. So you have to basically rack up a lot of spotting damage to equal a smaller amount of damage done. So you could be a really, really good light tank driver whose statistics are a little lower, just because even though you do your job incredibly well, you have to do like 50% more than another person would have to do who's just shooting tanks. So the statistics might be a little skewed, or they could not be, and you're just really, really good. But the
Are
point,
there any statistics you do like?
no, I don't like any of them because ultimately they don't matter. Like I remember when I played World of Tanks. Statistically, I was a I was a decent player. I was above average, certainly above average. Um, and I remember there was a time when someone got on me about, you know, my survival rate was really low. And in most games my survival rate is really low. I generally don't live through games that I play, but my win rate was good. My damage caused was fine, you know. Everything else was fine, but that wasn't good. And, you know, he goes on about um keeps going on about how, you know, oh, you know, it's all you do is die. All you do is run in and die. And I'm like, that's not true. You know, you have to look at the basket. And even then, it doesn't tell you what I'm going to do that game.
Yeah.
Because it could be a situation where, you know, maybe this is the game that I pull out that ace, you know, that ace mastery I've been looking for. I remember my STB1. I didn't have a tremendous amount of success with it at first. And then I was very below average with the tank. Just it didn't fit what I was trying to do. It didn't really fit what my playstyle kind of was at the time. Well, go on and I have one game that just I get my ace and it was just this like beautiful game. And I never achieved anything like that since, you know.
Yeah. But for
It
that one game, you were
for that one
as
game
good. You were as good as advertised.
is one
And
well not
it's
even as
something I
good
wanted
as
to hit on before
not
we.
even good as advertised. I was in the top 99% of players to play that tank that week.
Yeah, but just to hit on something, you know, like you want to talk about a bad statistic. Survival rating is a
I don't think
terrible.
it's
Yeah, it's a terrible statistic in my opinion, and you know, here's why. Because I probably need to back this up. So survival statistic is really hard to work with as or it's not hard, it's bad because and I've talked about this in videos before. Sometimes the answer to win the game is to throw yourself at the enemy and make them kill you. Sometimes it's not about surviving, it's about buying time or taking out a key vehicle at the cost of your own.
or interrupting the cap long enough for your team's cap to get ahead of the other team's cap.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
something that's
So
happened.
yeah, so you know, yeah, my survival rate is bad. But that's only because I'm a player that's willing to sacrifice my own statistic to make sure that we win. And you know that's so that I mean, and of course people who look at that kind of stuff generally don't acknowledge that kind of thing because that's just not what kind of people they are. But that is the that's kind of the counter argument to that is our goal here is to win. Our goal is not to do anything else. The only, which kind of sucks that win rate is also, we've said win rate is also a poor statistic because win rate is probably, ultimately the thing that matters. Are you winning games or not? But, it doesn't really capture that, hey, I'm willing to do what it takes to win. Even if what it takes to win usually results in me maybe not doing as much damage. Good example in World of Warships, U.S. carrier players who run the air superiority loadouts. They're not doing a ton of damage. They're not carrying the game like their Japanese counterparts. But a good U.S. carrier in a game where he's matched on tier against a Japanese carrier can make that Japanese carrier irrelevant. And suddenly he's sacrificing his own experience, his own, damage done and everything in order to shut down the other guy. And, taking a player out of the game that's a lot more powerful than he is, technically.
Well, a primetime example from earlier today, I was playing a game in my Atago, which is the rank 8 premium, and yeah, it was getting the score. The team scores were even, and I saw an opportunity. There was a Nagato, a Mogami, and a destroyer of some name in the middle of the map, and I was approaching. The Atago was very fast, so I was approaching rather quickly, and the options I had were to turn away and sail behind an island and wait and kind of skulk around and look for opportunity, or sail around the other side of the island, present my broadside, fire upon the Nagato, and launch my torpedoes, because this would have put me within about 5 kilometers of all of the 3 ships combined. Now, the problem is if you turn in and you go around the island on the side where the enemy ships are, you will probably die because the Nagato's there, the Destroyer's there, the Megami's there. All 3 are very dangerous ships. Well, the thing is that the enemy had pushed our team so far back in the map where we were basically behind our cap circle, and they were slowly kind of pushing us out of the map almost and running us into the back wall. And the issue we had is that the enemy were soon going to start capping. I was actually the last ship forward of the cap. So the decision I made was to sail around the other side of the map, or to sail around the other side of the cliff on the side of the enemy ships, launch my torpedoes, sink the Nagato. I think at the end of the day, I sunk the Destroyer, the Nagato, and and hit the Mogami with 2 torpedoes, or 1 or 2 torpedoes, that ultimately put him on perilously low health. I look at that as a trade in a situation where I didn't see a great chance of survival. I probably could have survived, but it was a situation where you destroy 2 ships at the cost of yours and also heavily damage another ship in one instantaneous trade. Now, I had done more than that prior to this, but in that one trade, it took a game that was even with us slightly losing just on position and basically opened the entire middle of the map, and our guys basically just sailed right up the middle of the map and split the enemy in 2 and just killed them. And we didn't lose another ship after that. So it's one of these things where sometimes the answer is to throw your ship away in a favorable trade to open up a grander strategy. So yeah, survival rate really doesn't mean anything. Win rate, it doesn't mean anything. And that's ultimately the message, I think, from my end, is that these statistics literally mean nothing. They tell you about the past, which is fine, and that's useful for government work and things like that. But it is not useful for an instantaneous evaluation of a player, right? Because that player could very well be the guy who needs to carry your team, and he may or may not do it. And there's plenty of times when someone who is statistically a very good player runs into a situation where they need to carry the team, and it's within their ability to do so, and they don't.
Yeah,
you know, they for whatever reason they don't. And then there's times when people who statistically aren't very good need to carry the game, and they pull it off. Sometimes outside of their perceived ability. And that's ultimately what kind of where I go with statistics, is it really doesn't matter. I honestly really hope that War Thunder never gets a statistical tool like XVM. And I sincerely hope that World of Warships never gets XVM or an XVM-like tool, because I think it creates an atmosphere where people evaluate and value someone's skill prior to any personal experience or even any instantaneous evidence that they are in fact not very good. Having no colored names and no battles played or percentages next to names is kind of refreshing. It's something I know that kind of drove me away from World of Tanks, primarily because my statistics were above average and improving, but it still was one of those things where, like you said previously, we could lose a game just because someone decides they're going to AFK because we have a 56% chance of losing. You know,
yeah. Well, and if they AFK, hey, look, now it's 76% chance.
Now all of a sudden you're increasing the chances that we lose. But so the only answer is to play, and to play as hard as you can, which you should do every game. You should play with the intention of trying to win. I mean, rare occasions, there are exceptions. I've played games just because, to do something dumb. I've done that. We all do that, and it's fine in doses. But it's almost if it gets to a point where you're doing it every game, then you're kind of you're doing a disservice to the other people playing the game. So, but then you have people who are really, really good at those, like I guess cheese mechanics, where they're really, really good at that gimmick, and they do it really well, and you win games because they're really good at a gimmick that usually doesn't work.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. I think yeah, I agree that statistics are just, they're in the past. You can't rely on them for anything of real value. And I agree that, I mean, it was something I noticed, and this is all retrospective because at the time, I mean, I just wasn't thinking about it, but I was a lot happier in World of Tanks before I knew what my stats were. Granted, I mean, some of that was because I wasn't very good initially, so my stats were not great. But like the day I installed XVM was the day World of Tanks became less fun. Not because I'm a bad player, because I was never, I would say, bad at World of Tanks. I was an average player. But the problem is that in this, stat happy world, in this, kind of the world that World of Tanks became, where it was so focused on stats. I mean, that meant that, being average was considered a bad thing. It's like, no, that's not how this works. Average is the norm. If
and then to expand it, recently on Reddit, I can't remember how long ago. I can't even remember what the name was. Even if I did, I wouldn't say. Someone posted like a list of statistics for a War Thunder squadron or clan or whatever the hell. I mean, how long have I played War Thunder for? I still don't know what the terms are.
I think it's squadron, but
yeah, whatever. And you open it up because you're curious. You go in and you look, and it's just this ridiculous congregation of just wild statistics where someone has a ridiculously low win rate, someone has a ridiculously high win rate. And with a game like War Thunder, it probably somewhat correlates to what tanks you were driving, what planes you were playing or flying. I mean, was it when open beta first launched, well before the recent patches, if you played a T-54, you achieved a 90% win rate, and you walked to the bank laughing. If you played,
we've sorry to cut you off. We talked about that. Like you were an above average World of Tanks player, and you had a 13% win rate in your Yag Tiger.
No. I was doing well in War Thunder, and my T-54, when I made the comparison, my T-54 had a 94% win rate. And I will state again, this is not because the T-54 was so insanely good that it just achieved this massive win rate. War Thunder's more extreme, and small advantages can turn into massive swings in terms of percentages. And at that point, my Yag Tiger win rate was 11, 12, or 13%. It was low teens, basically. And my T-54 win rate was like 94% or something stupid,
Yeah, and you want to talk about statistics being kind of worthless. Like, what does that say about the player?
All it told me was that, what it told me, and I think what ultimately I hope people realized, it wasn't that the Yag Tiger was a bad machine. It wasn't that the T-54 was an incredible machine. They were both good in their own respects. The problem is that at the time, what the Yag Tiger was good at was not really in the game. What the Yag Tiger needed to reach its true potential wasn't in the game. What the T-54, why it was so out of the box powerful, is because it really didn't need anything. It didn't need any other machine to help it along. The Yag Tiger needs its flanks secured. Well, if your Panther IIs are getting run over by T-54s, because the T-54 is a very powerful kind of off-to-the-side threat, you run into a situation where the Yag Tiger just dies because its flanks are no longer secure. It can't deal with all the number of threats coming after it. Once in bigger maps were introduced, once a couple new tanks were introduced, once some...
Hey, Swiss, sorry to pause. There's somebody at my door. Go on without me. I'll be right back.
Yep. Once the Yag Tiger kind of was given the element that it was designed to kind of designed for, you notice that I think it did pretty well. I thought the battle rating drop was, I didn't think the battle rating being dropped was the correct move. I thought just raising the cap was the right move, and pushing those tanks up was the right move, because the Jagdtiger had strong frontal armor and a powerful gun, and it could get the job done. So I guess the point of that example is that statistics, and I will state again, I do not think that the T-54 was powerful because the evil overlords decided that they wanted their T-54 to just kill everything. That wasn't really the case. T-54s died like other tanks. It was more so that at that early stage in development, there wasn't a real answer for the Germans at what the T-54 was good at. Right? A T-54 engaging with a Jagdtiger from long range in a favorable position for either tank, assuming they're facing each other, I would take the Jagdtiger. Has the more powerful gun, and it can definitely penetrate the front of a T-54. T-54 can only penetrate the lower plate of the Jagdtiger at that range, or at long range. So, like, yeah, I would definitely take the Jagdtiger over the T-54. But the point still stands. Statistics as a whole generally don't tell you the story that you need to know. They tell you a story, and whether you believe it or not is your own opinion. However, I've taken the position that they tell a story I don't care about. I don't care if someone's, if the last 100 games they've played, they played really poorly, on a kind of subjective basis. Because ultimately, those 100 games mean almost nothing to me. Actually, they do mean nothing to me. What I care about is the one game in the present, the game he's playing with me right now. He or she is playing with me right now. And if this is one of those games where they're not very good, well, there was no way to know. There's never any way to know. But it might be one of those games where they just turn it on and murder everybody, and I don't get to do any damage because they just took it all. There is a finite amount of damage. Welcome back. I think I'm basically wrapping up.
Yeah, no, and I agree, and I just wanted to reiterate one of your points, and I'm sure you made it already, but it's when you sign into the game with somebody, can't know what they're about to do. If they're a 10% win rate, well, maybe this is the 10% where they're going to go and go off, and go full God mode on somebody. But I can tell you one thing for sure: if you start yelling at somebody because their win rate's too low, I formally hypothesize that you have just decreased your win rate dramatically. Because either they're going to be pissed and yell back at you, and you're both going to be distracted, or he's not going to play well. Or maybe he leaves, or team kills you, or rage quits, or whatever. The thing is that can give you, this nice little view of what potentially might be given historical data. But I can tell you that your actions in the present influence the game. And even little things like saying, hey, nice shot, or, hey, ignore the guy talking about win rates. Let's get, you and me are going into this. Let's kill this.
It's kind of like, if it happens, it's happened and it's over. That's what I kind of think, but it's kind of a cynical way to look at it, probably. But yeah. That's basically all my thoughts on statistics. I guess I think that's all that needs to be one said. Sentence, I don't like them. You can keep them. I guess that was 2 sentences. But anyway, I want to thank everyone for watching. I encourage a respectful debate down below on kind of the value of this, but I also encourage you to realize that people are going to differ on opinion about this, and in no way, shape, or form does their opinions say anything poorly about their characters. So let's have a nice little discussion about it. And I would also encourage you, if you have a topic for a future ramble, please put it in the comments section, because that's where we draw the inspiration for these videos from, and that's where we're going to continue to draw the inspiration from. And I am going to backtrack a little bit. I know I've set like a hard line on politics and religion, saying no. I think some political issues we can discuss, but it's a gray area. Religion, no. We'll never discuss religion on this series, just because it's a topic that doesn't need to be discussed, in my opinion. So,
yeah, I agree.
So, yeah, I guess I've opened a can of worms there, saying politics is a gray area. It depends what you're asking. But if you ask intentionally, blatantly biased or inflammatory things, I we probably won't. I mean, I won't try and touch it. But if it depends on what the question is really. So I will say that. But anyway, I want to thank you guys for watching. I've been Corny Swiss.
I'm Corny Phil, but before we wrap, there is one more thing I want to shout out. This is unrelated to us in any way, but on Twitch right now and for the rest of this week, the week of the 27th.
Is that what the week is?
There is there is a live stream going on Twitch called Summer Games Done Quick. The huge gaming festival. We have speedrunners breaking games in half and doing some just absolutely insane stuff. More importantly, they're collecting money for Doctors Without Borders.
Mais sans frontières, monsieur.
Yes, exactly.
Très
So,
bon.
even though it's not War Thunder, World of Tanks, or even related to us in any way, I strongly encourage you guys to go and give them a check out. It's for a great cause, and it's absolutely amazing how good these guys are. So, go check it out. Summer Games Done Quick on the Games Done Quick live stream channel on twitch.tv. I've been Corny Phil.
Alrighty, and then with that unpaid advertisement, see you next time.